Guy Redstone had tracked elk through 3 territories and killed grizzlies with nothing but a knife and patience. But nothing prepared him for what he saw through the grimy window of the Thornhill Estate kitchen that October evening in 1892. 2 children, twins no older than 12, huddled in the corner beside the cold stove, dividing mouldy bread crusts and potato peelings between them with the careful precision of those who knew hunger intimately. Their hollow cheeks and 2 large eyes told a story his people understood well, a story of suffering hidden behind closed doors while respectable folks looked away. What Kai did next would turn the entire town of Sweetwater Creek against him, cost him contracts that kept him fed through winter, and force him to choose between the safety of silence and the dangerous path of doing what was right. The mountain air carried the scent of coming snow as Kai Redstone guided his Appaloosa through the narrow canyon pass leading down toward Sweetwater Creek. He had been tracking a wounded mountain lion for 3 days, following blood trails and disturbed earth across the high country of Northern California. The cat had taken 2 sheep from the Henderson Ranch and nearly killed their youngest son before escaping into the wilderness. The bounty was good, $20 and supplies for winter, enough to justify the hunt. His saddlebags carried the lion's pelt now, proof of the kill. But something else weighed heavier on his mind as the lights of town appeared below. The Thornhill Estate sat on the eastern edge of Sweetwater Creek, a sprawling manor house built with railroad money and maintained by the labor of servants whose names most townspeople never bothered to learn. Kai had delivered game to their kitchen before, venison and wild turkey that the cook paid fair prices for, always through the back entrance where servants and Indians belonged. As he approached the estate's service road, the sun had already dipped behind the western peaks, casting long shadows across the manicured grounds that seemed obscene in their perfection. Kai had grown up in a Kato village where every person's labor fed the community, where children learned to hunt and gather alongside their elders, where no one ate until everyone ate. The waste he witnessed in places like the Thornhill Estate turned his stomach. But business was business, and his people needed the money his hunting brought. He dismounted near the kitchen entrance, expecting to find the cook, Mrs. Patterson, preparing the evening meal. Instead, the kitchen was dark, except for a single lamp burning low on the far counter. Through the window, movement caught his eye, furtive and quick like animals caught scavenging. Kai stepped closer, his hunter's instinct making him move silently, despite the gravel beneath his boots. What he saw froze him in place. 2 children, a girl and a boy, identical in their sharp features and copper hair, crouched beside the stove. The girl held a tin plate, while the boy carefully divided what looked like scraps from earlier meals, bits of gristle and bread so stale it had gone green at the edges. They worked in absolute silence, their coordination speaking of long practice at this desperate ritual. The girl's dress was threadbare and too small, her bare feet dirty against the kitchen's stone floor. The boy's shirt hung loose on his thin frame. Patched so many times the original fabric was barely visible. Guy watched as the girl pushed the larger portion toward her brother, who immediately pushed it back. They repeated this silent argument twice more, before finally dividing everything exactly in half, eating quickly with their hands, glancing frequently toward the door, as if expecting to be caught. The boy coughed, a wet rattling sound that spoke of sickness taking root. And the girl placed her hand on his back with a tenderness that made something twist painfully in Kai's chest. He had seen poverty before, had lived through winters when his own village struggled to feed everyone. But there was something particularly cruel about watching children starve in the shadow of a house where the family ate 4-course meals on imported china. His hand moved to knock on the door before his mind fully decided to act, the sound sharp in the evening quiet. Both children jumped as if shot, the tin plate clattering to the floor. They scrambled to their feet, terror naked on their faces as they pressed themselves against the wall. Kai immediately regretted the knock, seeing how they trembled, how the girl positioned herself slightly in front of her brother despite being the same size. They expected punishment for their scavenging, expected violence. He opened the door slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening, a skill learned from approaching wounded animals. The children stared at him with wide eyes, their fear shifting to confusion as they took in his buckskin clothing, his long black hair tied back with leather cord, his face marked by traditional Kato tattoos. Indians were common enough in Sweetwater Creek, but usually only as laborers or guides, rarely entering the homes of wealthy families. The girl found her voice first, thin and shaky, but determined. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin in a gesture of dignity that would have been admirable if it were not so heartbreaking given her circumstances. Her green eyes met his directly, holding more strength than any 12-year-old should need to possess. "We are not stealing," she said, each word carefully pronounced. "These were scraps meant for the hogs. Mrs. Patterson said we could have what the animals did not want." The lie was obvious. Meant to protect someone, or perhaps just to maintain some shred of pride. Kai said nothing for a long moment, studying them both. The boy had the same green eyes as his sister, the same stubborn set to his jaw, despite the fear that made his hands shake. They were twins, that much was clear, bound together by blood and circumstance in ways that reminded Kai of his own childhood with his younger sister before the fever took her. "What are your names?" Kai asked, his voice gentle, speaking English with the precise articulation his grandmother had drilled into him. She had insisted all her grandchildren learn the white man's language perfectly, said it was armor against those who would dismiss them as savages. The girl hesitated, glancing at her brother before answering. "I am Lily," she said finally. "This is Finn. We work for the Thornhill family. We are servant children. The term was a polite fiction for something closer to indentured servitude, a practice that was illegal in California, but persisted in remote areas where law enforcement was sparse and wealthy families could do as they pleased. Kai had heard stories of children bound to families through debts their parents could never repay, working without wages beyond food and shelter, trapped in a system designed to keep them powerless. "Where are your parents?" he asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Children did not end up eating garbage unless there was no one to protect them. Finn spoke for the first time, his voice hoarse from the cough that still rattled in his chest. "Dead," he said simply. "Mama died birthing us. Papa worked the lumber mills until a tree fell wrong 2 years back. The Thornhills took us in after, said they would care for us in exchange for work. In exchange for work." Kai had heard those words before, knew how they translated in practice. The Thornhills had acquired free labor, 2 children who could be worked from dawn to dusk, with no one to advocate for them, no relatives to ask uncomfortable questions. In a town like Sweetwater Creek, where the Thornhills owned the bank and half the businesses, who would dare challenge their treatment of orphaned servants? Kai looked past the children to the kitchen itself, seeing now what he had missed in his initial shock. The space was large and well-equipped, but everywhere there were signs of neglect in the areas the family would never see. The servants' corner near the door held 2 thin pallets on the floor, blankets so worn they were almost transparent. A small trunk against the wall held what he assumed were the twins' possessions. The stove that should have kept the room warm sat cold and empty, despite the October chill that made his breath fog. "How long since you had a proper meal?" The question came out harsher than he intended, anger bleeding through despite his attempt at calm. Lily and Finn exchanged glances, that silent twin communication that needed no words. Lily answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mrs. Thornhill says we eat too much, that we should be grateful for any food at all. The family gets meals in the dining room. The other servants eat in shifts at noon. Finn and I get what remains after everyone else finishes." Which meant they got almost nothing, Kai realized. In a household where appearance mattered more than compassion, where waste was acceptable, but feeding hungry children was seen as excessive generosity, these 2 had been slowly starving while surrounded by abundance. The injustice of it made his hands curl into fists. He thought of his own childhood, of his grandmother teaching him to track and hunt, of communal meals where everyone contributed what they could and everyone ate until satisfied. He thought of the Cato principle of kinship, the understanding that all children belonged to the community, that their welfare was everyone's responsibility. These white settlers claimed to be civilized, claimed moral superiority over native peoples, yet they let children starve in their own homes. Kai made his decision in that moment, though he knew it would complicate his life in ways he could not yet fully comprehend. He straightened to his full height, meeting both children's eyes in turn, letting them see the determination in his face. "Pack your things," he said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had made up his mind and would not be swayed. "Whatever you own, whatever matters to you, put it in that trunk." Both children stared at him in confusion and dawning hope that they were clearly afraid to trust. Lily shook her head slowly, as if trying to clear it, as if she had misheard. Her voice came out uncertain, trembling with something that might have been the beginning of tears. "We cannot leave," she said. "The Thornhills own our father's debt. We are bound by contract until we turn 18. If we run, they will send the sheriff after us." Kai pulled a leather pouch from his belt, the weight of it substantial with the coins he had earned from the mountain lion bounty and other hunts. He tossed it onto the kitchen table, where it landed with a solid thunk, gold and silver glinting in the lamplight. "I will settle the debt," he said flatly. "Whatever they claim you owe, I will pay it. But you are leaving with me tonight. No child should live like this." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Finn's ragged breathing and the distant call of a night bird outside. Lily stared at the money pouch, then at Kai, her eyes searching his face for deception, for the catch that surely must exist. "No one helped for free," her expression said. "Everyone wanted something in return. Why?" The single word carried the weight of every betrayal they had experienced, every false promise, every moment of hope crushed under the heel of adult cruelty. "Why would you do this for us? You do not even know us." Kai met her gaze steadily, seeing in her the same fierce protective instinct he had felt for his own sister, the same determination to survive despite impossible odds. He thought about how to explain the concept of kinship to children who had been taught that their value was measured in labor, that their lives mattered only insofar as they served others. "Because leaving you here would be wrong," he said simply. "Because my people believe that all children are sacred, that their welfare is everyone's burden to carry. Because I can help, and that means I must—" He paused, then added more gently, "and because I know what it is to be hungry, to be treated as less than human, to wonder if anyone in the world sees your suffering. I see you, both of you, and I am taking you out of here." Finn moved first, stepping forward with a determination that belied his small frame and obvious illness. He reached for the trunk, began pulling out the few items it contained. A pair of worn shoes, some folded clothes, a small wooden horse that looked hand-carved, a tin box that rattled with small treasures. Lily hesitated only a moment longer before joining him, her movements quick and efficient as they gathered their meager possessions. "Syndrome!" Kai watched them work, his mind already calculating the complications ahead. The Thornhills would not simply accept payment and release the children without protest. In their eyes, this would be theft, an Indian stealing white children, a narrative that would inflame every prejudice in Sweetwater Creek. He would need to move quickly, establish the children's safety before the town's self-righteous anger could organize into a mob. The door from the main house suddenly swung open, lamplight spilling into the kitchen along with the sharp voice of Mrs. Thornhill herself. She was a tall woman, rail-thin and severe, her grey hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face into a permanent expression of disapproval. She froze in the doorway, taking in the scene with widening eyes. "What is the meaning of this?" Her voice rose to a shrill pitch as she pointed at Kai with a trembling finger. "Who are you? What are you doing in my kitchen?" "Lily, Finn, step away from that savage at once." Kai kept his voice level despite the insult, despite the rage that burned in his chest at her hypocrisy. My name is Kai Redstone. I am here to settle the debt these children owe you and take them into my care." Mrs. Thornhill's face flushed red, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly for a moment before she found her voice again. "You cannot simply take them. They are bound to us by legal contract. Their father owed us money when he died, and these children work to repay that debt. It is all perfectly legal and proper. How much?" Kai interrupted, his patience for her justifications exhausted. "Name the amount. I will pay it now, in full, and the children will leave with me." For a moment, naked calculation crossed Mrs. Thornhill's face as she weighed the value of free labor against immediate payment. Her eyes flickered to the money pouch still sitting on the table, visible even from where she stood. When she spoke again, her voice carried a note of cunning. $200, she said firmly. "That is what remains of their father's debt, plus the cost of their food and shelter these past 2 years. $200 paid tonight, or they stay where they are." It was an outrageous sum, easily 3 times what any real debt could amount to, but Kai had expected as much. He had also expected that the satisfaction of humiliating an Indian would be almost as valuable to her as the money itself. He stepped forward, picked up his money pouch, and began counting out coins onto the table with deliberate precision. 100, he counted aloud, stacking gold pieces in neat piles. 150, 200. Mrs. Thornhill's eyes widened as the full amount appeared on her kitchen table. She had clearly expected him to balk, to be unable to pay, giving her justification to refuse and summon the sheriff. Instead, she found herself staring at more money than she had likely seen in cash at one time. Payment for a debt that had never been accurately tallied because she had never expected to collect it. "There," Kai said, stepping back. "The debt is paid. The children are free to go." But Mrs. Thornhill was not finished. Her face had gone from red to pale, her hands clutching at her skirts as she searched for some other avenue of control. "You cannot take them," she repeated, her voice shaking now with something that might have been genuine fear of scandal. "People will talk. An unmarried Indian man taking 2 white children. The sheriff will hear of this. The whole town will hear of this. You will be arrested for kidnapping, for God knows what else they will accuse you of." She was right, Kai knew. The optics of this situation would feed every racist narrative that settlers used to justify their treatment of native peoples. An Indian taking white children would be seen as theft at best, something far more sinister at worst. He would need allies, witnesses, legal protection that his people rarely received in white man's courts. "Then we will go see the sheriff together," Kai said calmly. "Right now. You, me, and the children. We will explain the situation, show him the payment, and let him determine if any laws have been broken. Unless you would prefer to keep this quiet, to accept your payment and let them go without making this a public matter." The threat was implicit, but clear. A public examination of how the Thornhills had treated these children, of the conditions they had been living in, of whether the debt was ever legitimate in the first place, would not reflect well on the family's reputation. Mrs. Thornhill's eyes darted between Kai, the children, and the money on the table, weighing her options. Finally, she drew herself up with as much dignity as she could muster. "Take them then," she said coldly. "But know this, Mr. Redstone, you have made a powerful enemy today. The Thornhills are not without influence in this territory. If any harm comes to those children, if there are any accusations made, you will find yourself facing consequences you cannot imagine." Kai met her gaze without flinching. "The only harm these children have suffered has been under your roof, Mrs. Thornhill. I am taking them somewhere they will be fed, sheltered, and treated with the dignity every child deserves. If that makes me your enemy, I will bear that burden gladly." He turned to Lily and Finn, who had watched this entire exchange with expressions caught between terror and disbelief. "Get your things," he said gently. "We are leaving now." They moved quickly, grabbing their trunk and the few items they had pulled from it. Kai took the trunk himself, surprised by how light it was, by how little these children owned after 12 years of life. He led them toward the door, feeling Mrs. Thornhill's hatred boring into his back with every step. Outside, the night had fully fallen, stars emerging in the clear mountain sky. Kai helped the children into his wagon, a sturdy vehicle he used for transporting game and supplies, settling them on blankets in the back with the trunk secured beside them. They huddled together, still processing what had just happened, still afraid to believe in their sudden change of fortune. As Kai climbed into the driver's seat and took up the reins, Vin's voice came from behind him, small and uncertain in the darkness. "Where are we going?" Kai looked back at them, at their frightened faces and too thin bodies, at the hope they were afraid to acknowledge. He thought of his cabin in the mountains, simple but warm, stocked with game and supplies for winter. He thought of his people's village, a day's ride north, where children were welcomed and protected. He thought of all the complications ahead, the battles he would need to fight to keep these two safe. "Home," he said simply, snapping the reins to set the horses moving. "I am taking you home." The wagon rattled north through the darkness, following a narrow trail that wound deeper into the forested mountains, separating Sweetwater Creek from the high country where Kai made his home. The twins sat silent in the back, wrapped in the blankets he had given them, their eyes adjusting to the moonlight filtering through the pine canopy overhead. Kai could feel their uncertainty radiating like heat, their minds surely racing with questions about what came next, about whether they had traded one form of captivity for another. After an hour of travel, Finn's coughing grew worse, each spasm racking his thin frame until Lily held him tight, whispering reassurances that did nothing to ease the wetness in his lungs. Kai pulled the wagon to a stop near a small creek, the water's murmur barely audible over the wind moving through the trees. He climbed down and retrieved a leather pouch from beneath the driver's seat, approaching the twins slowly so as not to startle them. "This is willow bark tea," he said, offering a small tin cup filled with liquid he had prepared before leaving town. "It will help with the cough, ease the inflammation in his chest. My grandmother taught me how to prepare it." Lily took the cup suspiciously, sniffing its contents before holding it to Finn's lips. The boy drank without protest, too exhausted to question, and within minutes his breathing had eased enough that he could rest against his sister without the constant interruption of coughing. Kai watched them settle, seeing how Lily's hand never left her brother's shoulder, how even in sleep they remained connected. "You are Kato," Lily said suddenly, her voice cutting through the night sounds. It was not a question but a statement, her eyes studying the tattoos on his forearms, the particular style of his buckskin clothing. "I have seen your people in town sometimes, trading furs and baskets." Kai nodded, surprised by her observation. Most white children were taught to see all Indians as identical, interchangeable savages without distinct cultures or histories. That she recognized his specific tribe suggested either unusual education or natural curiosity that had survived despite her circumstances. "My grandmother was a medicine woman," he said, settling onto a fallen log near the wagon. "She taught me the old ways, how to read the forest, how to heal common ailments, how to live in balance with the land. When I was your age, I could track a deer through 3 valleys and tell you what it had eaten for breakfast." "Did you live in a village?" Finn asked, his voice stronger now that the tea had done its work. "We heard stories about Indian villages, but Mrs. Thornhill said they were all lies, that your people lived like animals in the dirt." The casual cruelty of that statement, delivered in a child's innocent voice, made Kai's jaw tighten. He forced himself to breathe slowly, to remember that these children had been fed poison their entire lives, that correcting 12 years of prejudice would take more than anger. "My village still exists, a day's ride north of here," he said carefully. "We live in homes we built ourselves, grow food in gardens we tend, raise children who learn our language and customs. We are not so different from any other people trying to survive, to maintain our way of life despite those who would see us disappear." He paused, choosing his next words with care. The stories you were told were meant to make you fear us, to justify how we are treated. But fear based on lies is just another form of control. I hope you will judge me by my actions, not by what others have told you to believe." Lily studied him in the moonlight, her expression thoughtful beyond her years. "You paid $200 for us," she said slowly. "That is more money than most people see in a year. Why would you do that if not to own us yourself? Everyone wants something." The question hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of experience that had taught her to trust nothing that seemed too good to be true. Kai understood her suspicion, even respected it. These children had survived by being cautious, by assuming the worst of adult intentions. "I want you to be safe," he said simply. "I want you to eat regular meals, to sleep in warm beds, to grow up without fear of violence or starvation. I want you to have the childhood that was stolen from you. That is what I want." "And in exchange," Lily pressed, her voice hardening, "what do we owe you? What work will we do to pay off this new debt?" Kai shook his head slowly. "There is no debt. You owe me nothing. In my culture, children are sacred, their welfare a responsibility shared by all adults. Helping you is not a transaction requiring repayment. It is simply what should be done." The twins exchanged glances, that silent communication passing between them again. Kai could see them struggling to process this concept, to fit it into a worldview shaped by transactional relationships, where nothing came without a price. He did not push, did not try to convince them with more words. Time and consistency would prove his intentions better than any speech. They traveled through the night, Kai keeping the horses at a steady pace that ate up the miles without exhausting the animals. The trail grew steeper as they climbed into the high country, the air thinning and cooling until their breath came out in visible clouds. Lily and Finn huddled together under the blankets, fighting sleep despite their exhaustion, still too uncertain of their situation to fully relax. Dawn broke over the eastern peaks as they crested a final ridge, revealing a valley below where a small cabin sat nestled among towering pines. Smoke rose from the chimney, and a corral beside the cabin held several horses and a milk cow. The structure was simple but solid, built from logs chinked with mud and moss, its roof covered in overlapping cedar shakes that had weathered to silver grey. "This is your home?" Finn asked, leaning forward to get a better view. His voice carried a note of wonder that made Kai smile despite his fatigue. "For the past 5 years," Kai confirmed, guiding the wagon down the switchback trail into the valley. "It belonged to a trapper who died without heirs. I claimed it, made repairs, turned it into something livable. The land is good here, plenty of game, clean water, far enough from town that I can live as I choose." As they approached the cabin, the door opened and a figure emerged. An older Kato woman with silver-streaked hair worn in 2 long braids. She wore traditional dress, deerskin decorated with shell beads and porcupine quills, and her face creased into a pattern of wrinkles that spoke of a life spent smiling. Her eyes, sharp and dark as a raven's, took in the wagon, Kai, and finally, the 2 children with an expression that shifted from surprise to understanding. "Grandmother," Kai called out in Kato, switching to his native language. "I have brought guests who need shelter." The old woman descended from the porch with surprising agility for someone who had seen 70 winters, her gaze never leaving the twins. She circled the wagons slowly, studying them with an intensity that made Lily pull Finn closer. Finally, she reached up and touched each child's face gently, her weathered fingers tracing their features as if reading a story written in bone and skin. "They are starving," she said in English, her accent thick but words clear. "Sick, frightened. What have you brought to my grandson's door, children of sorrow?" Kai climbed down from the wagon and helped the twins descend, their legs unsteady after the long night's journey. "Their names are Lily and Finn. They were servants in Sweetwater Creek, treated badly, fed scraps. I paid their debt and brought them here." His grandmother nodded as if this made perfect sense, as if Kai regularly appeared with orphaned white children in need of rescue. She took Lily's hand in her own, then Finn's, her touch warm and dry. "I am called Morning Dove," she said. "I am Kai's grandmother, teacher of medicine ways. You are safe here. No one will harm you while I draw breath." The simple declaration, delivered with absolute conviction, seemed to break something loose in the twins. Lily's carefully maintained composure crumbled, tears streaming down her face as the reality of their escape finally hit her. Finn pressed against her side, his own eyes wet, both of them trembling with exhaustion and relief, and the overwhelming terror of hope. Morning Dove made a soft sound of sympathy and gathered both children against her chest, her arms encircling them with practiced ease. She murmured words in Kato, a rhythmic cadence that needed no translation to convey comfort and safety. Kai watched his grandmother work her magic, seeing how the twins gradually relaxed into her embrace, how their rigid spines softened and their breathing deepened. "Come," Morning Dove said finally, releasing them but keeping hold of their hands. "First we eat, then we wash, then we sleep. All problems are smaller with full bellies and clean skin. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Inside, the cabin was warmer than anywhere the twins had been in months, heat radiating from a large stone fireplace that dominated one wall. The main room served multiple purposes, with a cooking area near the hearth, a table and chairs in the center, and sleeping pallets arranged along the far wall. Herbs hung drying from the rafters, filling the air with sharp medicinal scents. Animal furs covered the floor, and the walls displayed weapons, tools, and decorative items that spoke of Kato craftsmanship. Morning Dove bustled about the kitchen area, pulling out food with the efficiency of long practice. Within minutes, she had bowls of venison stew steaming on the table, along with fresh bread, dried berries mixed with honey, and cups of hot tea that smelled of mint and pine. She gestured for the twins to sit, her expression brooking no argument. Lily and Finn approached the food cautiously, as if expecting it to be snatched away, as if this abundance could not possibly be meant for them. Morning Dove noticed their hesitation and filled their bowls herself, setting them down with a firmness that made it clear she would be offended if they did not eat. "At this table all eat until satisfied," she said. "No one goes hungry in this house. No one fears punishment for needing food. You understand?" They nodded mutely and began to eat, slowly at first, and then with increasing desperation as their bodies recognized sustenance. Kai watched them devour the stew, saw how they tried to pace themselves but could not, how their hands shook as they lifted spoons to their mouths again and again. Morning Dove kept refilling their bowls until finally they slowed, their stomachs unable to hold more after so long, with so little. After the meal, Morning Dove heated water and created a bathing area behind a hanging blanket. She helped Lily first, washing the girl's hair and scrubbing away months of accumulated grime while speaking softly in a mix of English and Kato. When Lily emerged, wrapped in a clean deerskin dress that had belonged to Morning Dove in her youth, she looked transformed, her copper hair gleaming wet and her face showing its true features without the mask of dirt. Finn's turn came next, and Kai handled his bathing, noting the boy's ribs standing out sharply beneath his skin, the bruises in various stages of healing that covered his back and arms. Evidence of beatings, administered regularly and without mercy. Kai said nothing, did not want to force the boy to relive those moments, but he filed away every mark, every sign of abuse, storing them as evidence of what these children had endured. When both twins were clean and dressed in borrowed clothes, Morning Dove examined Finn's chest, her practiced hands feeling for the rattle of infection in his lungs. She frowned, her expression serious, as she pressed her ear against his back and listened to his breathing. Finally, she straightened and began selecting various dried herbs from the bundles hanging overhead. "Pneumonia is beginning," she announced, mixing ingredients in a clay bowl. "Not far along, but it will worsen without treatment. He needs medicine 3 times daily, complete rest, and food to give his body strength to fight." She prepared a strong-smelling poultice and applied it to Finn's chest, wrapping him in warm cloths soaked in herbal tea. "You will sleep now," she told him, her tone allowing no argument. "Your body needs rest to heal. No work, no worry, just sleep and let the medicine do its work." Finn looked to his sister for permission, their bond such that he would not rest if she remained awake. Lily nodded, exhaustion clear in every line of her body, and Morning Dove led them both to a sleeping area she had prepared with fresh furs and blankets. Within minutes, both children had fallen into deep sleep, their bodies finally surrendering to the safety they had been offered. Kai stood, watching them sleep, his mind already working through the complications that would follow this rescue. Morning Dove joined him, her presence solid and reassuring at his side. She had appeared at his cabin 3 days ago, arriving unannounced as she often did, claiming she had dreamed he would need her. "You have claimed them," Morning Dove said quietly, speaking Kato, so the sleeping children would not understand if they woke. "Taken responsibility for their welfare. This will bring trouble, grandson. The white people do not like when we take what they consider theirs." "They were starving," Kai replied in the same language. "Being worked like animals, beaten, denied even basic dignity. I could not leave them there." "I know," Morning Dove said, her hand coming to rest on his shoulder. "You have your mother's heart, fierce in protection of those who cannot protect themselves. But hearts do not stop bullets or legal judgments. We must think clearly about what comes next." A sound from outside interrupted them, the distinctive rhythm of approaching horses moving fast. Kai moved to the window, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle hanging beside the door. Through the trees, he could see riders, at least 5 of them, moving toward the cabin with purpose. "Grandmother," he said quietly, "wake the children. We may need to move quickly." The riders burst into the clearing, their horses snorting and stamping as they pulled up short near the corral. Kai recognized the lead rider immediately. Sheriff Tom Bridger, a fair man by Sweetwater Creek standards, but still bound by the prejudices and pressures of his position. Behind him rode 4 deputies, hands resting casually near their holstered weapons, their faces set with the hard certainty of men who believed themselves on the side of righteousness. Morning Dove had already roused the twins, her hands firm but gentle as she guided them to a corner of the cabin where they would be visible but protected. Lily's eyes were wide with terror, her body instinctively positioning itself between Finn and any potential threat. The boy clung to his sister's borrowed dress, his face pale except for the fever flush on his cheeks that spoke of his worsening condition. Kai stepped out onto the porch, his rifle held loose at his side, not threatening but clearly visible. He had learned long ago that showing weakness to men like these invited violence, that strength was the only language they respected. Morning Dove emerged behind him, her presence a statement of its own, her weathered face showing no fear despite the odds arrayed against them. Sheriff Bridger dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate as he surveyed the cabin and its occupants. His eyes lingered on the twins, visible through the open doorway, taking in their clean clothes and the obvious signs of care they had received. Whatever he had expected to find, this scene of domestic tranquility seemed to give him pause. "Kai Redstone," Bridger said, his voice carrying across the clearing with official weight. "Mrs. Thornhill filed a complaint this morning. Says you kidnapped 2 children from her household, threatened her with violence, and stole property belonging to her family. She is demanding their immediate return and your arrest." Kai kept his expression neutral, his voice level as he replied. "I paid the debt she claimed the children owed, $200 in gold and silver. The payment was witnessed by Mrs. Thornhill herself. I took nothing that was not freely purchased." "She says the children were not for sale," Bridger countered, his hand resting on his gun belt in a gesture that was more habit than threat. Says they were under her legal guardianship until they reached 18, that no amount of money could void that arrangement. Says you forced your way into her home and coerced her into accepting payment under duress. The lies were so blatant that Kai almost laughed, but he recognized the danger in this moment. The sheriff's words mattered less than his intent, and Kai could not yet read which way the man would fall. Behind him, he heard Lily's sharp intake of breath, felt her fear like a physical weight pressing against his back. "Look at them, Sheriff," Morning Dove said, her English heavily accented but clear as mountain water. "Look at these children and tell me they were well cared for. Look at their bodies, their fear, and tell me they should return to that house." She moved aside, allowing Bridger a clear view of the twins. Then, with a gentleness that belied her fierce expression, she guided Finn forward and lifted the back of his borrowed shirt to reveal the pattern of bruises covering his thin torso. Some were fresh, dark purple and angry. Others had faded to yellow-green, evidence of beatings administered over weeks or months. "These are not accidents," Morning Dove said flatly, her finger tracing the air above the marks without touching them. "These are beatings, regular and severe. This boy has pneumonia from sleeping in cold, from being denied proper food and shelter. These children were dying slowly in that place, and everyone knew, but no one cared." Sheriff Bridger's expression tightened as he took in the evidence, his jaw working as if chewing on words he could not quite swallow. The deputies shifted uncomfortably in their saddles, their hands moving away from their weapons. Whatever narrative Mrs. Thornhill had spun for them that morning, this visible proof of systematic abuse complicated the simple story of kidnapping they had been prepared to act upon. One of the deputies, a younger man Kai recognized as Robert Chen, the nephew of the Chinese merchant in town, spoke up hesitantly. "Sheriff, those marks look pretty bad. Maybe we should hear what the children have to say before we make any decisions." Bridger shot him a look that could have frozen water, but the suggestion had been made publicly and could not be easily dismissed without appearing to ignore evidence. The sheriff turned back to Kai, his face showing the internal struggle of a man caught between duty and conscience. "I need to speak with the children," Bridger said finally, his tone making it clear this was not a request. Alone, without anyone influencing their answers. "That's proper procedure, and you know it, Redstone." Kai wanted to refuse, wanted to keep the twins close where he could protect them, but he also recognized that cooperation now might prove their best strategy. He looked past Bridger to Lily, seeing her terror but also her intelligence, trusting her to speak truth even in the face of authority that had never protected her before. "They may speak with you," Kai said carefully, each word chosen with precision. "But my grandmother stays with them. They have been through enough trauma without being interrogated by strange men, without any friendly presence to provide comfort." Bridger considered this, his eyes moving between Kai, Morning Dove, and the twins. Finally he nodded once, a sharp gesture of agreement. "Acceptable. The old woman can stay, but you and your rifle stay out here while I conduct my interview. Deputies, you remain mounted and keep watch." Morning Dove took the twins inside, her hand resting protectively on each of their shoulders as she guided them to the table. Sheriff Bridger followed, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold, a small gesture of respect that did not go unnoticed. The door closed behind them, leaving Kai alone on the porch with 4 armed deputies watching him with varying degrees of suspicion and uncertainty. The next 20 minutes stretched like hours, each second heavy with possibility and danger. Kai stood motionless on his porch, his rifle now leaning against the wall within easy reach, but not held in a way that could be interpreted as threatening. He watched the deputies watch him, all of them caught in this moment of waiting. This pause before decisions were made that could not be unmade. Robert Chen, the young deputy who had spoken earlier, cleared his throat softly. "My uncle told me about you," he said, his voice pitched low so the other deputies could not easily hear. "Said you were one of the few white men in town who treated him with respect, who paid fair prices for his goods and did not spit when you passed him on the street." Kai glanced at him, surprised by this offering of common ground. "Your uncle was a good man," he replied equally quietly. "His death was a loss to the whole community, though few acknowledged it. He used to say that a person's character showed in how they treated those who could do nothing for them." Chen continued, his eyes fixed on the cabin door. "Said you had more honor than most of the so-called respectable families in Sweetwater Creek. I'm inclined to trust his judgment." Before Kai could respond, the cabin door opened and Sheriff Bridger emerged, his face troubled in a way that suggested the conversation inside had not gone as he might have expected. He crossed back to his horse slowly, his movements those of a man wrestling with a decision whose consequences he could not fully predict. Bridger mounted and sat for a long moment, staring at nothing while his deputies waited for orders that did not come. The silence stretched until one of the other deputies, an older man named Harris with a reputation for casual cruelty toward anyone not white and wealthy, spoke up with barely concealed impatience. "Well, are we taking them back or not? Mrs. Thornhill was very clear about what she expects. I cannot return those children to the Thornhill estate," Bridger said finally, the words seeming to cost him something. "Not after what I have seen and heard. Not in good conscience." Harris's face darkened with anger. "You cannot be serious. We are talking about an Indian taking white children. Do you understand what people will say? What they will think? This sets a precedent that cannot be allowed." "What I understand," Bridger said, his voice hardening with authority, "is that those children have been systematically abused, starved, and worked beyond their capacity. I understand that the law requires me to protect the vulnerable, not return them to their abusers regardless of their social standing. And I understand that if you question my judgment again, Deputy Harris, you will find yourself looking for new employment." The rebuke landed like a physical blow, silencing Harris and sending a ripple of surprise through the other deputies. Guy felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he had been holding since the moment the riders appeared. The sheriff had made his choice, had placed justice above social pressure, at least for now, but Bridger was not finished. He turned his attention back to Kai, his expression making clear that this victory came with conditions. "This situation is complicated, Redstone. You are an unmarried Indian man claiming guardianship of 2 white children. There will be talk, accusations, demands for their removal to a proper Christian household. I need something to work with here, some way to frame this that does not give the town ammunition to come after you with torches and rope." Morning Dove appeared in the doorway again, the twins sheltered behind her skirts. Her expression was thoughtful, calculating in the way of someone who had spent a lifetime navigating the treacherous waters between 2 cultures. When she spoke, her words were carefully chosen. "I will stay," she announced, her voice carrying clearly across the clearing. "Make this a proper home with a woman present, a grandmother to care for the children alongside my grandson. That satisfies your propriety concern, yes? A household with both male and female guardians, with an elder to provide wisdom and guidance." Bridger seized on this suggestion with visible relief. "Yes," he said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "Yes, that helps considerably. An elder woman as primary guardian, with you assisting. Kai! That is a structure I can defend to the town council, at least for the time being." He paused, then added more quietly, his voice losing some of its official tone. "I am giving you time, Redstone. Time to get those children healthy, time to find a more permanent legal solution. But the Thornhills will not accept this quietly, and they have friends who will make trouble. Influential friends who can make life very difficult for everyone involved. You need to be prepared for a fight. I have been preparing my whole life," Kai replied, his voice steady. "This fight is just more honest than most." Bridger nodded, as if he had expected this answer, perhaps even respected it. He gathered his reins and turned his horse, the deputies following his lead, though Harris shot one last venomous look at Kai before departing. Robert Chen lingered a moment longer, offering a small nod of acknowledgement before following his fellow officers back down the trail. As the sound of hoofbeats faded into the forest, Kai returned inside to find the twins sitting at the table, their faces showing exhaustion mixed with cautious hope. Morning Dove was preparing more tea, her movements calm and steady despite the tension that had just passed. She hummed softly, a Kato lullaby that Kai remembered from his own childhood. "What happens now?" Lily asked, her voice small but determined. "Do we really get to stay? Or will they come back with more men, with people who will not listen to reason?" Kai crossed to kneel beside her chair so they were at eye level, his hands resting gently on the table between them. "You stay here with us for as long as you need. We will fight to keep you safe, to give you the life you deserve. That is a promise I make to you both, and I do not make promises lightly." Finn reached out and touched Kai's face, his small fingers tracing the tattoos on Kai's cheek with childlike curiosity. "You are not afraid of them," he said wonderingly. "The sheriff, the town, all those angry people. You are not afraid?" "Oh, I am afraid," Kai admitted, seeing no point in false bravado with children who had learned to read adult emotions for their own survival. "But being afraid does not mean doing nothing. It means choosing what matters more than fear. And you two matter more than my fear, more than my comfort, more than my standing in a town that has never fully accepted me anyway." Morning Dove set cups of tea before all of them, the fragrant steam rising in delicate spirals. She settled into her own chair with a sigh that spoke of both relief and anticipation of struggles yet to come. Her eyes met Kai's across the table, and in that look passed generations of wisdom about survival, about resistance, about the cost of doing what was right. "We need allies," she said in Kato, switching to their language so the twins could not understand the full scope of what they discussed. "The sheriff bought us time, but time without strategy is just delayed defeat. We need voices in town willing to speak for us, witnesses who can testify to what those children endured." "Margaret Chen," Kai replied in the same language. "The widow who runs her late husband's store. She has no love for families like the Thornhills, and she understands what it means to be judged unfairly by people who consider themselves superior." "And the school teacher," Morning Dove added. "Miss Sarah Winters. She is new to Sweetwater Creek, comes from back east, where they have different ideas about how children should be treated. I have heard her speak against the practice of binding orphans to wealthy families as unpaid servants." Kai nodded, seeing the beginnings of a strategy forming. "We document everything," he said, his mind working through the logistics. "The bruises, the malnutrition, the conditions they lived in. We gather witnesses willing to testify about what they saw or suspected about the Thornhill household. We build a case that no honest judge could ignore, make enough noise that silence becomes more dangerous than action." "And if the judge is not honest?" Morning Dove asked, her tone pragmatic rather than defeatist. "If he decides law matters less than keeping Indians in their place, keeping the social order undisturbed, then we fight anyway," Kai said simply. "We make enough noise that the story spreads beyond Sweetwater Creek to newspapers in Sacramento and San Francisco where people might care about children being abused. We force them to acknowledge publicly what was done to these children, to choose between justice and prejudice where everyone can see their decision." Morning Dove smiled at that, her weathered face creasing with fierce pride. "Your grandfather said something similar before he went to speak against the land theft in Sacramento, got himself arrested for his trouble and spent 6 months in a cell that almost killed him. But his words were recorded, became part of the official record. Sometimes the act of resistance matters more than its immediate result. Plant seeds that grow in unexpected places." Lily cleared her throat softly, drawing their attention back to the present moment. "We do not understand your language," she said, "but we understand that you are planning how to protect us. We want to help. We can testify about what happened at the Thornhill house, about how they treated us. We are not afraid to tell the truth." Kai switched back to English, impressed by her courage and insight. "You may need to do exactly that," he said honestly. Tell your story to people who have the power to help, to judges and officials who can make legal decisions about your future. It will not be easy. They will ask difficult questions, may try to make you doubt your own memories or suggest you are lying to protect me. We will not lie, Finn said, his voice hoarse but determined. And we will not let them send us back there. We would rather run away, live in the forest, than go back to that place. Morning Dove reached across the table and took both children's hands in her own, her grip warm and strong. You will not need to run, she said firmly. You will not need to hide or live in fear. We stand with you, and we will find others who will do the same. This I promise on the spirits of my ancestors. The afternoon passed quietly after that, the twins gradually relaxing as the cabin's warmth and safety began to feel real rather than temporary. Morning Dove prepared a substantial meal, teaching Lily how to season venison stew while Finn watched from his nest of blankets near the fire. Kai worked outside, tending to the animals and checking his traps, but his mind never strayed far from the complications brewing in Sweetwater Creek. As evening approached, a single rider appeared on the trail, moving slowly and openly in a way that suggested peaceful intent. Kai recognized Margaret Chen before she even reached the clearing, her distinctive dark blue riding dress and the determined set of her shoulders unmistakable even at a distance. He stepped out to meet her, curious about what would bring her. All this way alone. Margaret dismounted with practiced ease, her eyes taking in the cabin and its surroundings with quick assessment. She was a woman in her early 40s, her Chinese heritage evident in her features, but her clothing and manner purely Western. Her late husband's store had been the only one in town that stocked goods from both white and Chinese merchants, that served all customers with equal respect regardless of their race or wealth. Mr. Redstone, she said formally, though her eyes held warmth. I hope I'm not intruding. I heard about your trouble with the Thornhills and thought perhaps you might welcome an ally. Kai gestured toward the cabin. You are welcome here, Mrs. Chen. Please, come inside. We were just sitting down to eat, and there is always room for one more at our table. Inside, Margaret greeted Morning Dove with the respect due an elder, then turned her attention to the twins with a gentleness that immediately put them at ease. She studied their faces carefully, seeing past their fear to something deeper, some quality that seemed to satisfy a question she had not voiced aloud. I knew your father, she said to them, her words falling into the quiet like stones into still water. Thomas Fletcher worked in my husband's store sometimes, doing repairs and odd jobs. He was a good man, honest and hard-working. He would be proud to see you now, safe and cared for. Lily's eyes widened with surprise and something that might have been grief. You knew our father? But Mrs. Thornhill said he was a drunk and a wastrel, that he died owing money to everyone in town. Mrs. Thornhill is a liar, Margaret said flatly, with no attempt to soften the accusation. Your father died in an accident. At the lumber mill, crushed by falling timber while trying to save another worker. He died a hero, and the only money he owed was a small amount to the company store. The Thornhills took you in claiming charity, then worked you like slaves while telling everyone you were paying off fictional debts. I knew it was wrong, but I had no standing to interfere, no legal right to challenge their guardianship. She turned to Kai, her expression hardening with resolve. But now you have given me that opportunity. I came to offer my support, my testimony about what I knew and suspected, and to tell you that you are not alone in this fight. There are others in Sweetwater Creek who are tired of the Thornhills, and their kind, tired of watching injustice go unchallenged because no one wants to risk their social standing. Kai felt hope stirring again, stronger this time. How many others? He asked carefully. Margaret smiled, and it was not a gentle expression. Enough, she said. Enough to make a difference if we stand together. 3 days after Margaret Chen's visit, Kai rode into Sweetwater Creek with a purpose that had hardened like iron in a forge. Morning Dove had stayed behind with the twins, her presence ensuring their safety while also maintaining the appearance of propriety that Sheriff Bridger had deemed necessary. The town spread before him in the valley below, its wooden buildings clustered along a single main street like teeth in a predator's jaw. The whispers started before he even dismounted. Women gathering their children closer as he passed, men stepping out of storefronts to watch his progress with hostile eyes. News had spread faster than wildfire, the story changing with each retelling until some versions painted him as a savage who had stolen white children for purposes too dark to speak aloud. He kept his expression neutral, his movements deliberate and unthreatening, giving them no excuse to act on their prejudice. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. Margaret Chen's store sat at the far end of the main street, its windows displaying goods from San Francisco and beyond. Kai tied his horse outside and entered, the bell above the door announcing his arrival. Margaret looked up from behind the counter, her face showing relief at his arrival, mixed with concern about what his presence might mean. "They have been talking about nothing else," she said without preamble, gesturing toward the street outside. "Half the town wants you arrested, the other half is arguing about whether what you did was legal. The Thornhills have been making their rounds, calling in favors, pressuring people to support their version of events." Kai nodded, having expected as much. "And Miss Winters, the schoolteacher you mentioned, has she agreed to help?" Margaret's expression brightened slightly. "She is waiting in my back room. Insisted on speaking with you directly before committing herself. She is cautious, which is wise, given what supporting you might cost her position." She led Kai through a curtained doorway into a small storage area that had been converted into a makeshift office. A woman in her late 20s sat at a desk covered with papers, her brown hair pulled back in a practical bun, her grey eyes sharp with intelligence. She stood as Kai entered, her posture suggesting both nervousness and determination. "Mr. Redstone," she said, offering her hand in a gesture that surprised him. Few white women would shake hands with an Indian, considering it beneath their dignity. "I am Sarah Winters. Mrs. Chen has told me about the situation with the Fletcher twins. I want to help if I can, but I need to understand exactly what I would be supporting." Kai appreciated her directness. "I found 2 children eating garbage in the Thornhill kitchen," he said bluntly. "They were starving, beaten, sick from neglect. I paid the debt Mrs. Thornhill claimed they owed and took them to my home, where they are now being fed, sheltered, and treated with basic human decency. That is the situation." Sarah studied his face as he spoke, her eyes searching for deception or hidden motives. Finally, she nodded as if satisfied by what she saw. "I taught those children briefly before Mrs. Thornhill withdrew them from school, claiming they were needed for household duties. Even in the short time I knew them, I noticed signs of abuse. Lily had bruises she tried to hide. Finn flinched whenever anyone moved too quickly near him. I reported my concerns to the school board. And," Kai prompted when she paused, "and I was told to mind my own business, that how wealthy families managed their servants was not my concern," Sarah said, bitterness coloring her words. "I was reminded that I am new to Sweetwater Creek, that my position depends on not making trouble for important families. But I became a teacher to help children, not to ignore their suffering for the sake of my own comfort." Margaret stepped forward, her voice low but intense. "We are proposing something that could damage all our reputations, possibly end Sarah's career and hurt my business. But we are also proposing something right, something that needs to be done regardless of cost. The question is whether we have the courage to see it through." Before Kai could respond, the bell above the shop's front door rang again, followed by heavy footsteps and angry voices. Margaret's expression tightened as she recognized the sounds of trouble arriving. She moved quickly to the curtain, peering through a gap before turning back to Kai and Sarah with urgency written across her face. "Harrison Thornhill himself," she said quietly. "With 4 men from his lumber operation. This is not a social call." Kai's hand moved instinctively toward the knife at his belt, but Sarah caught his arm. "No violence," she said firmly. "That is exactly what they want, an excuse to claim you are dangerous. Let me handle this." Before he could argue, she swept through the curtain into the main shop, her schoolteacher's authority settling over her like a cloak. Kai and Margaret followed, positioning themselves where they could intervene if needed, but allowing Sarah to take the lead. Harrison Thornhill stood in the center of the shop, a tall man with the soft body of someone who had never done physical labor. His face red with anger that seemed barely controlled. "There you are, Redstone," he said, his voice carrying the arrogance of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Thought you could hide behind women's skirts? We are here to discuss the return of my wife's property, namely 2 children you stole from our household." "Mr. Redstone stole nothing," Sarah said crisply, her tone the same one she used to correct misbehaving students. "He legally purchased the contract you claimed bound those children to your household. The transaction was witnessed and documented. Unless you are suggesting your wife lied about accepting payment." Thornhill's face darkened further. "Those children were not for sale. The money was accepted under duress, with this savage threatening my wife in her own home." "That is a lie," Kai said flatly. "I made an offer, she named a price, I paid it. There was no threat, no coercion, just a business transaction. Unless you are claiming your wife is so weak-minded, she cannot conduct simple business without being frightened into compliance." The insult to his wife's competence landed like Kai had intended, forcing Thornhill to choose between maintaining his narrative and defending his wife's dignity. He sputtered, caught in the trap of his own story, while his men shifted uncomfortably behind him. One of them, a younger man with the weathered face of someone who actually worked for a living, spoke up hesitantly. "Mr. Thornhill, sir, maybe we should let the law handle this. Sheriff Bridger already looked into it and said the children could stay with the Indian for now." "Bridger is a fool," Thornhill snapped. "He allowed himself to be manipulated by a clever savage and a sick old woman. But the law is more than one man's opinion. I have filed a complaint with the territorial judge, demanding the children's return and Redstone's arrest for kidnapping. Judge Morrison will be here within the week to sort this matter out properly." Margaret stepped forward, her voice cold as winter wind. "Judge Morrison, who owes you money from that failed mining investment? Judge Morrison, whose brother works in your lumber mill? That Judge Morrison, how convenient that such an impartial figure will be deciding this case." Thornhill turned his glare on her. "Careful, Mrs. Chen. Your position in this town is more precarious than you seem to realize. A Chinese woman running a business, serving Indians and other undesirables. It would be a shame if something happened to damage your reputation or your property." The threat hung in the air, naked and ugly. Kai felt rage building in his chest, but Margaret's hand on his arm stayed him. Her expression had not changed, her voice remained level, but something dangerous flickered in her eyes. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Thornhill, in front of witnesses? Because I should inform you that I keep very detailed records of all my business transactions, including some interesting irregularities in the lumber purchases your company made last year. Records that might interest the Territorial Tax Authority if they were to receive an anonymous tip." It was Thornhill's turn to pale slightly. Whatever financial impropriety she was alluding to clearly struck a nerve. He drew himself up, attempting to regain control of the situation through sheer force of will and social standing. "This conversation is pointless," he declared. "Judge Morrison will arrive next week, and this matter will be resolved according to law and proper Christian principles. Those children belong in a civilized household, not living in the wilderness with savages. Any decent person can see that those children were being abused in your household," Sarah said, her voice ringing with conviction. I will be testifying to that effect at any hearing Judge Morrison conducts. I will describe the bruises I saw, the fear in their eyes, the suspicious circumstances of their withdrawal from school, and I will make sure my testimony is recorded and sent to the Territorial Education Authority. Thornhill's composure cracked entirely. You will do no such thing, Miss Winters. One word from me to the school board, and you will be dismissed before sunset. Your teaching certificate will be worthless in any town in this territory. Then I will teach somewhere else, Sarah replied calmly, somewhere that values truth over social convenience. But my testimony will still be given, and it will still be recorded. And you will still have to explain why multiple witnesses observed evidence of abuse in your household. For a moment, violence hung in the air like a physical presence. Thornhill's men tensed, hands moving toward weapons they might or might not be carrying. Guy positioned himself between them and the women, his body language making clear he would not allow them to be harmed. Margaret reached beneath her counter, her hand emerging with a shotgun that she laid across the wooden surface with deliberate care. I think you gentlemen should leave now, she said quietly, before this situation escalates beyond words into something we will all regret. The law will handle this matter as it should, but it will handle it fairly, with all evidence and testimony considered, not according to your preferences. Thornhill stared at her for a long moment, his face working through various expressions before settling on cold fury. You are all making a terrible mistake, he said finally. When this is over, when those children are back where they belong and Redstone is in chains, you will remember this day. You will remember the choice you made to stand against your own kind for the sake of a savage and his stolen property. He turned and stalked out, his men following with visible relief at escaping without bloodshed. The bell above the door seemed to ring with finality as they departed, marking a point of no return. Sarah slumped against the counter, her hands shaking now that the confrontation had passed. Margaret carefully returned the shotgun to its hiding place, her movements showing the strain she had been concealing. Well, Margaret said into the heavy silence, I suppose we are committed now. No going back after that performance. Kai moved to the window, watching Thornhill and his men mount their horses and ride toward the other end of town. He will not wait for the judge, he said quietly. Men like that do not accept being challenged publicly. He will try something before Morrison arrives. Try to take the children by force or discredit us in some way that makes the legal hearing irrelevant. Then we need to be ready, Sarah said, her voice steadier now. We need more witnesses, more evidence, more people willing to stand with us. How many others in this town have been hurt by the Thornhills and families like them? How many are tired of watching injustice go unpunished? Margaret pulled out a piece of paper and began writing names. The Hendersons lost their farm to Thornhill's bank when their daughter got sick and they could not make payments. They have been bitter about it for years. Samuel Foster, the blacksmith, was cheated on a contract for ironwork at the mill. Maria Delgado, whose son was beaten by Thornhill's foreman and no charges were ever filed. She continued listing names, a catalogue of grievances and injustices that painted a picture of a town where the wealthy operated without consequence and the powerless had no recourse. Guy listened, seeing the potential but also the risk. These people had been silent for years, afraid to speak up because the cost seemed too high. Convincing them to act now would require more than just righteous anger. They need to see that standing together makes them less vulnerable, not more, he said, thinking aloud. One person challenging the Thornhills gets crushed, but a dozen people with documented evidence and legal representation that becomes harder to dismiss. We need a lawyer, Sarah said suddenly, someone from outside Sweetwater Creek who is not beholden to the local power structure. Someone with a reputation strong enough that Judge Morrison cannot simply ignore their arguments. Margaret's expression brightened with sudden inspiration. Thomas Blackwood, she said. He is a lawyer in Sacramento, known for taking cases involving Indian rights and civil liberties. My husband knew him slightly, said he was one of the few honest attorneys in California. If we could convince him to take this case, how would we pay him? Kai asked practically. I have some money left from my hunting, but legal fees for a case like this could be substantial. I have money, Margaret said firmly. Enough to retain him and cover initial costs. And if others join us, we can share the expense. This is about more than just 2 children, Kai. This is about whether law protects everyone, or just those with wealth and social position. That is worth investing in. They spent the next 2 hours planning, drafting a letter to Thomas Blackwood that outlined the situation and included depositions from Sarah about what she had witnessed at the school. Margaret added her own statement about Thomas Fletcher's character and the circumstances of his death. Kai contributed his account of finding the children and the transaction with Mrs. Thornhill, careful to include every detail that might prove relevant. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the shop floor, Sarah prepared to leave, her face showing both determination and apprehension about what her involvement might cost. I should return to the schoolhouse before anyone notices my extended absence, she said. But I will continue gathering evidence, speaking quietly with parents whose children might have witnessed how Lily and Finn were treated. Be careful, Margaret warned. Thornhill was not exaggerating when he said you could lose your position. The school board is made up entirely of wealthy families who socialize with the Thornhills. They will not hesitate to sacrifice you to maintain their relationships. I know, Sarah said simply, but I did not become a teacher to protect my own comfort. I became a teacher because children deserve advocates, people willing to stand up for them when they cannot stand up for themselves. If that cost me this position, I will find another. Some things matter more than security. After she left, Kai and Margaret sat in the gathering darkness, neither moving to light a lamp. The weight of what they had set in motion pressed down on them both. The understanding that they had declared war on the social order that governed Sweetwater Creek. That victory was far from certain, and defeat could be devastating. Why are you doing this? Kai asked finally. You could have stayed neutral, protected your business, let someone else fight this battle. Why risk everything for 2 children you barely know? Margaret was silent for a long moment, her eyes fixed on something Kai could not see. When she spoke, her voice carried old pain. My husband and I had a daughter, she said softly. She died when she was 8, fever that the white doctor refused to treat because we were Chinese. He said his skills were not meant for our kind, that we should seek help from our own people. But there were no Chinese doctors in Sweetwater Creek, and by the time we could get her to Sacramento, it was too late. Her hands clenched on the counter. I know what it means to watch a child suffer, because adults decided their prejudices mattered more than a life. I know what it means to be told you are less deserving of help because of who you are. So when I see 2 children being treated as property, being abused and starved while the town looks away, I cannot stay silent. Not again. Not ever again. Kai reached across and placed his hand over hers, a gesture of solidarity and shared grief. They sat together in the darkness, 2 people from different worlds, united by the understanding that some injustices demanded resistance regardless of cost. Outside, Sweetwater Creek continued its evening routines, oblivious to the storm gathering in its midst. As Kai prepared to leave, Margaret handed him the sealed letter to Thomas Blackwood, along with money for postage and a faster courier. Send this tonight, she said. We need him here before Morrison arrives, need time to prepare a proper defense. And Kai, be watchful on your ride home. Thornhill struck me as a man who might try something desperate if he thinks he can act without witnesses. The warning proved prescient. Kai was barely a mile outside town, the trail climbing into the forested foothills, when he sensed movement in the trees ahead. His horse's ears pricked forward, catching sounds too subtle for human hearing. Kai's hand moved to his rifle, drawing it smoothly from its saddle holster as 3 men emerged from the shadows, their faces covered with bandanas, their intent unmistakable. That is far enough. Indian, the lead rider said, his voice muffled but carrying menace. Time to discuss the return of those children and your immediate departure from this territory. Permanently, Kai assessed the situation with the quick calculation of someone who had faced danger before. 3 men, armed but not yet weapons drawn, positioned to block the trail but not spread out enough to prevent escape if he moved fast. They expected intimidation to work, expected him to surrender without a fight. That assumption would be their mistake. I have no intention of discussing anything with men too cowardly to show their faces, Kai said calmly. Step aside or face the consequences of your choice. The lead rider laughed, a harsh sound without humor. Big words from one man facing 3. You are going to give us a signed statement saying you abducted those children illegally, that you lied about paying any debt. Then you are going to disappear, go back to whatever savage village spawned you, and never return. Refuse, and we make sure you never make it home at all. Kai's response was to raise his rifle in one smooth motion, the barrel pointing directly at the lead rider's chest. I am Kato, he said quietly. We do not surrender, we do not run, and we do not make empty threats. Now move, before I decide talking is finished. The standoff lasted only seconds before the lead rider made his move, his hand diving toward the pistol at his hip. Kai was faster, squeezing his rifle's trigger with the practiced precision of a hunter who never missed his target. The shot shattered the evening quiet, the bullet striking exactly where he had aimed, tearing through the man's gun hand before he could clear leather. The rider screamed, his pistol tumbling to the ground as blood sprayed across his saddle. The other 2 men froze, their courage evaporating as they realized this was not going to be the easy intimidation they had planned. Kai worked the rifle's lever action, chambering another round with a metallic click that sounded deafening in the sudden silence. He kept the weapon trained on the second rider, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. Your friend will live if he gets that hand treated properly, Kai said, his voice carrying no emotion. The next shot will not be so merciful. Now remove those bandanas so I can see exactly who Harrison Thornhill sent to do his dirty work. The wounded man was clutching his ruined hand, his face pale with shock and pain. The other 2 exchanged glances, weighing their options, and clearly finding them all unpleasant. Finally, the second rider reached up and pulled down his bandana, revealing a face Kai recognized from around town, one of the lumber mill workers named Preston. The third man followed suit, showing himself to be Davis, another of Thornhill's employees. He said you would back down, Preston muttered, his voice carrying equal parts anger and fear. Said Indians always fold when faced with real consequences. Guess he was wrong about that. Harrison Thornhill is wrong about many things, Kai replied. Now take your wounded friend and get him to a doctor. Tell Thornhill that if he wants those children back, he can make his case to Judge Morrison like the law requires. Send men after me again, and I will assume deadly intent and respond accordingly. He nudged his horse forward, the rifle still ready but pointed skyward now. The 3 men parted to let him pass, Preston and Davis supporting their wounded companion between them. As Kai rode past, the injured man spoke through gritted teeth, his words slurred with pain and shock. You just made yourself a dead man, Indian. Thornhill does not forgive, and he does not forget. You should have killed us all when you had the chance. I'm not a murderer, Kai said without looking back. But I am done being a victim. There's a difference you would do well to remember. He rode hard for the next hour, putting distance between himself and any potential pursuit, though he doubted Thornhill's men would regroup quickly after that encounter. The letter to Thomas Blackwood burned in his saddlebag, a potential salvation if the lawyer agreed to take their case. Everything now depended on whether an attorney in Sacramento would care about 2 orphan children and the Indian who had claimed them. Night had fully fallen by the time Kai reached his valley, the cabin's windows glowing with warm lamplight that spoke of safety and home. He could see shadows moving inside, Mourning Dove's distinctive silhouette as she moved between the hearth and the table. The sight eased something tight in his chest, reminded him what he was fighting for beyond abstract principles of justice. Mourning Dove met him at the door, her sharp eyes taking in his tense posture and the rifle he still carried ready. Trouble, she said in Kato, making it a statement rather than a question. I felt it in my bones when the sun set. Knew you were in danger. Thornhill sent men to ambush me on the trail, Kai replied in the same language, not wanting the twins to understand if they were listening. 3 of them, armed and masked. I wounded one and sent them running, but this proves he will not wait for the judge. He means to resolve this his own way. Morning Dove's expression hardened. Then we must be ready to fight or flee. The children cannot be here if Thornhill brings more men, brings violence to our door. We need a safe place for them, somewhere he cannot reach. My village, Kai said, the solution forming even as he spoke. Your village where our people can protect them. It's a day's ride north, far enough from Sweetwater Creek that Thornhill would have to lead a small army to reach them, and such an action would draw attention he cannot afford. Inside, Lily and Finn sat at the table, their faces showing the worry they had been trying to hide. They had been here less than a week, but already they looked healthier, their cheeks filling out slightly, Finn's cough diminishing under Morning Dove's care. The fear in their eyes now was different from before. Not the dull acceptance of inevitable suffering, but the sharp terror of those who had tasted safety and could not bear to lose it. Something happened, Lily said, reading the tension in Kai's body. Mr. Thornhill did something, did he not? He's trying to take us back. Kai saw no point in lying. He sent men to intercept me on the trail, to try to force me to give you up. I stopped them, but there will be more attempts. We need to move you somewhere safer while we fight this battle in court. You are sending us away, Finn said, his voice small and hurt. We are too much trouble, so you are getting rid of us. Morning Dove crossed to kneel before the boy, her weathered hands cupping his face gently. No, little one. We are protecting you, which is different. Kai's village is a sacred place, where children are treasured and strangers are not welcome. You will be safer there than anywhere else, while we face those who would harm you. And we will visit, bring news, stay connected until it is safe for you to return. How long? Lily asked, her voice tight with the effort of holding back tears. How long before we can come home? The word home struck Kai like a physical blow. In less than a week, these children had come to see his cabin as home, had allowed themselves to hope for permanence, despite everything that should have taught them better. He knelt beside Morning Dove, meeting both children's eyes in turn. I cannot promise a timeline, he said honestly. The judge arrives next week and we will present our case. We have allies gathering evidence, a lawyer we hope will represent us. But legal battles can take time, and powerful men like Thornhill have ways of delaying justice. What I can promise is that we will not abandon you, will not stop fighting until you are truly safe and free. What if the judge says we have to go back? Finn whispered, voicing the fear they all carried. What if he decides Thornhill's word matters more than ours, because we are just children, and you are just an Indian? Then we appeal to a higher court, Kai said firmly. And if that fails, we take you somewhere the law cannot reach, somewhere you can grow up free. I would rather be a wanted man, with clear conscience, than a free man who allowed children to suffer because following rules was more convenient than doing what was right. Morning Dove stood and began gathering supplies, her movements efficient as she prepared for the journey ahead. We leave before dawn, she announced. Travel while it is still dark. Reach the village by tomorrow evening. Guy will ride ahead to the town with the letter for the lawyer, make sure it gets sent with fastest courier available. Then he returns here to wait for the judge, to stand his ground when trouble comes. The night passed in preparation and fitful sleep. Kai oiled his weapons and checked his ammunition, knowing Thornhill might escalate further. Morning Dove packed food and medicine, enough for several days of travel. Lily and Finn helped where they could, their faces showing resignation mixed with trust that these adults would protect them as promised. Just before dawn, as stars began fading from the sky, they gathered outside the cabin. Morning Dove would take the twins north on Kai's gentlest horse, while he rode hard for the nearest telegraph office to ensure Blackwood received their plea for help. The separation felt wrong, like dividing a family that had only just begun to form, but necessity demanded it. Kai knelt one final time before the twins, pulling them both into a fierce embrace. "Be brave," he told them quietly. "Remember that you are not alone, that people are fighting for you who will not stop until you are safe. My grandmother will keep you hidden and protected until I come for you. Promise you will come," Lily demanded, her small hands clutching his shirt. "Promise you will not forget about us once we are gone." "I promise on my ancestors, on everything I hold sacred," Kai replied. "You are mine now, both of you, as surely as if you were born of my blood. Nothing will change that, not distance, not time, not the anger of men who think children are property to be owned." He watched them ride away as dawn light began filtering through the trees. Morning doves straight back, and the twins' smaller forms gradually disappearing into the forest. The cabin felt emptier than it ever had during his years of solitary living, as if those few days with the children had filled spaces he had not realized were hollow. Kai rode hard for the telegraph office in Pine Ridge, a larger town, 2 hours south, where technology had reached before it arrived in Sweetwater Creek. The clerk took his money and his urgent message to Thomas Blackwood without comment, though his eyes lingered on Kai's face with the curiosity of someone who had heard stories. The letter, followed by courier, guaranteed to reach Sacramento within 2 days. On the return journey, Kai stopped at several homesteads, speaking quietly with families that Margaret Chen had identified as potential allies. The Hendersons listened to his story with growing anger, remembering their own daughter's illness and the bank's refusal to show mercy. Samuel Foster, the blacksmith, needed less convincing, his hatred of Thornhill running deep enough that he agreed to testify without hesitation. At each stop, Kai documented what he learned, building a picture of systematic abuse of power that extended far beyond 2 orphaned children. Thornhill had been exploiting the vulnerable for years, using his wealth and position to escape consequences while crushing anyone who challenged him. The pattern was clear to anyone willing to look, which was exactly why most people had chosen not to. By the time Kai returned to his valley, word had spread about the ambush on the trail. 3 riders waited at his cabin, but these were not Thornhill's men. Sheriff Bridger sat his horse with visible discomfort, flanked by Deputy Chen and another deputy Kai did not recognize. Bridger's face showed a man torn between duty and conscience, wrestling with decisions that had no easy answers. "I heard about what happened last night," Bridger said without preamble. "Preston and his friends showed up at Doc Miller's with quite a story about being ambushed by a crazy Indian." Of course, Preston's story did not mention why 3 armed men would be waiting on that particular trail at that particular time. "Self-defense," Kai said flatly. "They blocked my path, made threats, reached for weapons first. I defended myself using appropriate force and allowed them to leave alive. That is what happened. That is what I figured," Bridger replied. "And that is what I will report, for whatever it is worth. But Kai, this situation is spiraling out of control. Thornhill is furious, making accusations, demanding your arrest for assault, and claiming you are holding those children against their will in some secret location." "The children are safe and well cared for," Kai said, offering no details about their whereabouts. "They are with people who will protect them from Thornhill's reach." "That is all anyone needs to know," Deputy Chen spoke up, his young face earnest. "My aunt says you're doing the right thing, that someone needed to stand up to families like the Thornhills. She wants you to know that the Chinese community in Sweetwater Creek stands with you. For whatever that is worth, it is worth a great deal," Kai replied, surprised and moved by this declaration of support. "Tell your aunt I'm grateful and tell her to be careful. Thornhill strikes at anyone he perceives as an enemy." Bridger shifted in his saddle, clearly uncomfortable with what he had to say next. "Judge Morrison arrives in 3 days. He has ordered a formal hearing to determine the children's custody and to investigate the circumstances of how they came to be in your care. You will need to appear and bring the children with you. The judge wants to question them directly." "Absolutely not," Kai said immediately. "I will not deliver those children into a situation where Thornhill might seize them before the hearing even begins." The judge can question them with proper safeguards in place, neutral witnesses present, guarantees that they will not be taken by force. You are not in a position to dictate terms, Bridger said, though his tone suggested he agreed with Kai's caution. Morrison is known for his temper and his strict interpretation of procedure. Refusing to produce the children could result in a warrant for your arrest, charges of contempt, forfeiture of any custody claim you might have. Then I will face those charges, Kai replied. But I will not risk those children's safety to satisfy legal procedure. Tell the judge he can conduct his hearing, hear testimony from witnesses, review evidence. But the children stay protected until I have guarantees about their safety. The third deputy, silent until now, finally spoke with barely concealed hostility. You are making this worse for yourself, Indian. Judge Morrison does not like being challenged, especially not by your kind. Keep pushing, and you will find yourself in chains regardless of what happened to those brats. Deputy Chen turned on him sharply. Show some respect, Wilson. Mr. Redstone is not on trial here, and calling abused children brats shows exactly the kind of attitude that created this situation in the first place. Wilson's face darkened, but before he could respond, Sheriff Bridger intervened. Enough. We are not here to debate, just to deliver the judge's summons and ensure Kai understands the situation. What happens next is up to him. After they departed, Kai stood alone in his valley as afternoon shadows lengthened across the cabin. Everything was converging toward the hearing in 3 days, toward a moment when years of injustice and abuse would either be acknowledged or buried beneath the weight of social privilege. He thought of Lily and Finn, safely hidden in his village, but terrified about their future. He thought of Margaret Chen and Sarah Winters, risking everything to stand for what was right. He thought of all the people Thornhill had crushed over the years, their voices silenced by fear and power. That evening, a rider appeared on the trail, moving fast and direct. Kai recognized Margaret's distinctive blue riding dress before she even reached the cabin. She dismounted in a rush, her face flushed with excitement and exertion. Thomas Blackwood responded, she said breathlessly, waving a telegram. He is coming. Left Sacramento this morning, should arrive tomorrow evening. He says your case has merit, that he has been looking for an opportunity to challenge the indentured servitude practices in this territory. He is bringing legal precedents and is prepared to fight. Relief flooded through Kai, so intense it made his knees weak. We have a chance then. A real chance. More than that, Margaret continued. Sarah has been gathering statements from former Thornhill servants, adults who were bound to the family as children and can testify about similar treatment. She found 6 people willing to speak publicly, to describe beatings and starvation and conditions that amount to slavery. This is bigger than just Lily and Finn now, Kai. This is about exposing a system that has operated in darkness for too long. They spent hours planning strategy, discussing what testimony would be most effective, how to present evidence in ways that even a biased judge would struggle to dismiss. Margaret had brought documents showing financial irregularities in Thornhill's businesses, suggesting that much of his wealth came from exploiting unpaid child labor rather than legitimate enterprise. As night fell and Margaret prepared to leave, she paused at the door, her expression serious. You should know that Thornhill has been spreading rumors about you and the twins. Ugly rumors about why an unmarried man would take in 2 children, about what might be happening to them in your care. It is vile and completely unfounded, but people are listening because they want to believe the worst about Indians. Kai felt anger burning cold in his gut. Let them believe what they want. The truth will come out at the hearing, and their prejudices will be exposed for what they are. I hope you are right, Margaret said quietly. But even if we win in court, winning in the court of public opinion may prove harder. Be prepared for that, for the possibility that you do the right thing and still end up vilified. After she left, Kai sat alone in the darkness, thinking about the weight of what he had taken on. He could have walked away that night when he saw the twins eating scraps, could have convinced himself it was not his problem, that interfering would only bring trouble he did not need. Instead, he had acted on instinct and principle, had claimed responsibility for two children he barely knew because leaving them to suffer was unthinkable. Now he stood at the center of a storm that would determine not just the fate of Lily and Finn, but would test whether justice could exist for people without power, without wealth, without white skin. The hearing in 3 days would be a reckoning, a moment when Sweetwater Creek would have to choose between comfortable lies and uncomfortable truths. Kai thought of his grandfather, who had spent 6 months in jail for speaking truth to power, who had suffered for principles he knew might not triumph in his lifetime. He thought of his grandmother traveling through dangerous territory to protect 2 children she had just met because children were sacred regardless of their race. He thought of Margaret and Sarah, risking their livelihoods because some causes demanded sacrifice. He thought of Lily and Finn, 2 children who had survived horrors that should never be inflicted on the innocent, who had learned to divide scraps and bear beatings with silent endurance. They deserved better than a world that saw them as property, as burdens, as inconvenient complications to be hidden away. They deserved protection, justice, and the chance to grow up free from fear. Whatever the hearing brought, whatever Judge Morrison decided, whatever consequences followed, Kai knew he had made the only choice his conscience would allow. Some battles had to be fought not because victory was certain, but because surrender was unthinkable. This was that kind of battle, and he would see it through to whatever end awaited. The hearing was set for 10 o'clock on a grey October morning when clouds hung low over Sweetwater Creek like a physical weight. Kai rode into town, flanked by Morning Dove and the twins, who had returned from the village under cover of darkness the night before. Thomas Blackwood rode beside them, a tall man in his 50s, with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. He had arrived 2 days earlier and spent every waking hour preparing their case with the methodical precision of someone who understood that details won courtrooms. The town had turned out in force, the courthouse steps crowded with onlookers whose faces showed the full spectrum from supportive to hostile. Margaret Chen stood near the entrance with a group of Chinese merchants, their presence a silent statement of solidarity. Sarah Winters waited with several other women who had signed statements supporting the twins. But the opposing crowd was larger, louder, their anger palpable in the autumn air. Thornhill stood at the center of well-dressed men and women, the social elite of Sweetwater Creek, who saw this hearing as a challenge to the natural order they benefited from. Lily and Finn walked between Kai and Morning Dove, their hands clutched tight, their faces showing courage that broke Kai's heart with its terrible necessity. They wore new clothes that Margaret had purchased, simple but clean and well-fitted, a stark contrast to the rags they had worn at the Thornhill estate. Finn's cough had nearly disappeared under Morning Dove's care, though he still looked thin, his body bearing the marks of prolonged malnutrition. As they climbed the courthouse steps, someone in the crowd shouted an obscenity, something vile about Indians and white children. Others took up the cry, their voices rising in a chorus of hate that needed no specific words to convey its meaning. Kai felt Lily flinch beside him, felt Finn press closer against Morning Dove's leg, and rage burned through him hot and clean. Thomas Blackwood turned to face the crowd, his voice cutting through the noise with courtroom-trained authority. "I am Thomas Blackwood, attorney at law from Sacramento. I represent Kai Redstone and stand as counsel for Lily and Finn Fletcher in these proceedings. Anyone attempting to intimidate my clients or interfere with this hearing will face immediate legal action. I suggest you remember that this is a court of law, not a mob gathering." His words carried enough weight that the crowd quieted, though hostile murmurs continued. Sheriff Bridger appeared at the courthouse door, his face grim as he assessed the situation. He gestured for Kai's group to enter quickly, positioning himself and Deputy Chen between them and the crowd until they were safely inside. The courtroom was already packed, every seat filled with townspeople eager to witness what they saw as either justice or spectacle. Judge Edmund Morrison sat behind the bench, a heavy-set man in his 60s with a face that suggested chronic indigestion. His reputation preceded him, conservative to his core, known for ruling in favor of established power and social order. Harrison Thornhill sat at the plaintiff's table with his own attorney, Gerald Hawthorne, a sharp-faced man from a firm that specialized in protecting the interests of wealthy families. Mrs. Thornhill was present as well, dressed in expensive black silk, her expression one of wounded dignity. Judge Morrison called the court to order with 3 sharp raps of his gavel. This hearing will determine the custody and welfare of minors, Lily Fletcher and Finn Fletcher. Mr. and Mrs. Harrison Thornhill have petitioned this court to return the children to their custody, claiming they were unlawfully removed from the Thornhill household by the defendant. Kai Redstone? He looked directly at Kai with barely concealed prejudice. Mr. Redstone, I must say I find your actions highly irregular. Taking white children into your household, hiding them from proper authorities, refusing to produce them when summoned. Thomas Blackwood stood smoothly. Your Honor, with respect, my client acted to protect endangered children from ongoing abuse. He paid the full amount demanded by Mrs. Thornhill for their release, and has provided them with food, shelter, and medical care they were denied in the Thornhill household. Morrison's expression soured. Counsel will refrain from making arguments before testimony has been heard. Mr. Hawthorne, you may present your case. Hawthorne rose, his movements theatrical as he addressed the court. Your Honor, the facts are simple. My clients took in 2 orphaned children out of Christian charity after their father died in an industrial accident. They provided these children with food, shelter, education, and moral guidance, asking only that the children contribute to household duties appropriate to their age. He gestured toward the Thornhills. Mrs. Thornhill became attached to these children, treating them as members of her own family. Imagine her shock when this man invaded her home, threatened her with violence, and abducted the children by forcing her to accept money she never wanted. The transaction was conducted under duress, making it legally void. That is a lie, Lily said loudly, her young voice cutting across the courtroom. Every head turned toward her, shock registering on many faces that a child would dare interrupt formal proceedings. Judge Morrison's face darkened with anger. Young lady, you will remain silent unless called upon to testify, he began. But Lily was not finished. She is lying, Lily repeated, her voice stronger despite her trembling. Mrs. Thornhill did not love us. She beat us. She starved us. She made us sleep on the floor like animals and eat scraps meant for pigs. Everything Mr. Hawthorne just said is a lie, and I will not sit here and listen to lies about people who saved our lives. The courtroom erupted, voices rising in shock and argument. Morrison hammered his gavel repeatedly, demanding order. I will have order in this court or I will clear the room. Young lady, another outburst like that and I will hold you in contempt. Thomas Blackwood stood again. Your Honor, the child has every right to defend herself against false testimony. If the court wishes to hear the truth about what happened in the Thornhill household, allow me to present witnesses who can provide detailed accounts. Hawthorne fumbled through his remaining arguments, calling Mrs. Thornhill to the stand to testify about her supposed attachment to the children, her shock at their removal. She performed admirably, tears flowing as she described her heartbreak, her fear for the children's safety with a savage who could not possibly understand how to care for civilized youngsters. When Blackwood's turn came for cross-examination, he approached with careful precision. Mrs. Thornhill, you claim you treated these children as family members. What were their sleeping arrangements in your household? She hesitated. They had pallets in the kitchen near the stove for warmth. On the floor, Blackwood clarified. While your own children sleep in beds, these children slept on thin pallets on a stone floor. Is that how you treat family? They were servants, Mrs. Thornhill said, her mask slipping. It would not have been appropriate for them to have the same accommodations as our own children. Ah, so they were servants, not family members, as your attorney claimed. Blackwood pounced. And what were their duties? The questioning continued relentlessly, pulling apart every element of her story until contradictions emerged. She admitted the children worked from dawn until late evening, that they ate only after everyone else had finished, that they received no wages or education beyond basic literacy. When Kai took the stand, he spoke plainly about finding the children eating garbage, about the bruises and malnutrition, about paying the debt Mrs. Thornhill demanded without threat or coercion. Morning Dove followed, describing the children's condition when they arrived, the pneumonia developing in Finn's lungs, the evidence of systematic beatings. Her expertise as a healer gave her testimony authority that even Morrison seemed reluctant to dismiss. Then came the supporting witnesses. Former Thornhill servants testified about their own experiences of abuse as children. Margaret Chen described Thomas Fletcher's character, demolishing the narrative that he had been a drunk and wastrel. Sarah Winters presented documentation of the twins' withdrawal from school, of bruises she had observed. The Henderson family testified about Thornhill's banking practices. A pattern emerged of a family that saw people as resources to be exploited. Finally, Blackwood called Lily to the stand. She walked forward with her head high, her hand briefly touching Kai's shoulder as she passed. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. "Lily Fletcher," Blackwood began gently, "please tell the court what life was like in the Thornhill household." She described waking before dawn to start fires and prepare breakfast. She described eating scraps and stale bread while watching the Thornhills feast. She described her brother's illness being ignored, his cries dismissed. She described the beatings, administered with a leather strap for infractions real and imagined. She described Mrs. Thornhill's cold fury, the way she would smile in public while inflicting private cruelties. And then one night, Lily said, her voice steady despite tears streaming down her face, Mr. Redstone appeared. He saw us eating garbage, and instead of looking away like everyone else in this town had done for 2 years, he acted. He offered us safety, and when Mrs. Thornhill tried to stop him, he paid money he did not owe for freedom we should have had by right. He saved our lives, and this court is trying to punish him for it. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Morrison seemed affected. Hawthorne attempted to cross-examine, to suggest Lily had been coached, but she met every question with unwavering consistency. Finn's testimony followed, shorter but equally powerful. His quiet voice described fear and hunger. When asked if he wanted to return to the Thornhill household, his answer was simple and devastating. "I would rather die. I would rather run away and live in the forest and freeze to death than go back there. At least dying would be quick." After final arguments, Morrison adjourned for deliberation. The wait stretched for 2 hours while the courtroom remained packed. When Morrison returned, his face was unreadable. This court has heard extensive testimony regarding the welfare and custody of the Fletcher twins. The evidence presented has been disturbing, suggesting systematic mistreatment that cannot be ignored. Kai felt hope stirring. "However," Morrison continued, and that single word crushed the hope, "this court must also consider social proprieties. Mr. Redstone, whatever his intentions, is an unmarried Indian man living in isolation. The children require proper Christian education, exposure to civilized society." He paused. Morrison was going to rule against them, but then Morrison's expression shifted. "That said, this court cannot in good conscience return these children to a household where evidence suggests they were systematically abused. The Thornhill custody is hereby terminated. However, Mr. Redstone's custody is also denied. Instead, temporary custody is granted to Mrs. Margaret Chen as legal guardian. Mr. Redstone may serve as co-guardian under her supervision, with Morning Dove residing in the household to ensure propriety." The courtroom erupted. Morrison hammered his gavel. "Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the Territorial Attorney General for investigation into broader labor practices involving minor children. If this represents a pattern, criminal charges may be warranted." Outside the courthouse, Margaret Chen embraced the twins, while Morning Dove and Kai stood together. They had not won completely, but they had won what mattered most. In the weeks that followed, life found a new rhythm. The twins moved into Margaret's spacious home, with Kai and Morning Dove taking rooms nearby. Margaret's business improved as customers disgusted by the Thornhills made a point of supporting her. The twins thrived under care that included regular meals, warm beds, education, and the knowledge they were wanted rather than tolerated. The territorial investigation uncovered dozens of cases similar to the twins. Children bound to families under conditions that differed from slavery only in name. Reforms were being discussed in Sacramento. It would take years to change everything, but change had begun. One evening, 6 months after the hearing, Kai sat on Margaret's porch, watching Lily and Finn play in the street with other children. Their copper hair caught the late sun, their voices rising in joy rather than fear. Morning Dove sat beside him. "You did a good thing, grandson," she said in Kato. "Those children know love now, know what it means to be valued. That is worth every difficulty you faced. We did it together," Kai corrected. "You, Margaret, Sarah, everyone who stood up when it would have been easier to look away." Lily ran up to the porch, her face flushed with happiness. "Kai, Finn says you promised to teach us tracking before winter. Can we start tomorrow?" He smiled, ruffling her hair. "Tomorrow we start. But remember, tracking requires patience." "We have patience," Finn called from where he was playing. "We have all the time in the world now." All the time in the world. Kai thought about how different that sounded coming from children who had once measured their existence in days of survival. They had time now because someone had chosen to act, had refused to let convenience or fear prevent him from doing what was necessary. As evening deepened and stars emerged, Margaret called the children inside for supper. Kai and Morning Dove followed, stepping into the warm light and noise of a home filled with family. Not the family any of them had been born into, but the family they had chosen to become. Sometimes the right path was not the easy one. Sometimes standing up meant standing alone until others found their own courage. Sometimes justice required sacrifice, demanded that comfortable people face uncomfortable truths. But sometimes, if you refused to look away, if you acted when action was needed, if you fought for those who could not fight for themselves, you could change the world one rescued child at a time. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.